Okay, thank you so much for coming, everyone. I hope it continues to fill up. Can you all hear me well? Yeah? Okay, so my name is Sebastian Errazuriz. I'm a Chilean designer and artist. I'm based in New York, and I was asked to come and speak. The strange thing is, I don't do ecological design. My design and my art goes way further in another area. But from a perspective of confronting design, I think I have a few ideas that could contribute to the whole ecological design in general. So we all know about design, but we tend to forget that the origin of the word design is de, out, and signare, mark. So it's basically to mark out. And the Italians have the disegno, which means to draw. The interesting thing is that today, this concept is so much stronger than normal, because we all want to draw. Everyone today wants to be a personal designer, they want to be an interior decorator, they want to be a product designer, they want to be an artist, they want to be a series of things. So we all want to draw to stand out, and in the times of the iMac, the I this, the I that, it's also the time of me. And we all want to be famous, like Andy Warhol would say, 15 minutes, but not 15 minutes just in all of our lives. We want to be famous 15 minutes every single day. As a consequence of this, and together with this, we're having a hugely fast-moving technological revolution that's allowing each one of these eyes to also have a series of tools at their disposition. So now we have 3D libraries, 3D printers, 3D CNC machines, and so on. So now anyone who before would have to work together with a team to be able to create a product, maybe for months, maybe for years, to be able to make something together that would be important. Today we're flushing out designs as if anything. And because we have blogs instead of magazines, and instead of having maybe 5, 6, 10, 15 new designs every month, today we have instead 15, 20, 50 new news in every single blog about a new design that needs to come out. So we're contaminated, saturated by huge amounts of all sorts of design. Within this scramble of figures all trying to make their mark, we have all the top dogs, that each one has somehow managed to patent the particular brand of design. And so Zaha Hadid will always do a design that looks like Zaha Hadid. We all know what Zaha's new design is going to look like. We don't need to wait for it, we can pretty much imagine the result. The same goes for this guy. His new design, we already know, is going to probably be pink. Probably will be in a series of colors and shapes and so on. And the problem with this is that it's somehow misguiding all the new generations of eyes. And they all tend to understand that what I need to do is create my own signature version, my own new chair, as opposed to maybe going back to old times and thinking, why do I need a new chair? So the whole saturation of people, the whole saturation of new generations will now be producing a lot of products that you must have seen that will look like this. There'll be a lot of polygonal trends. Or on the contrary, there will be a lot of indie trends where we'll be going back to wood and back to rough photos and stuff that looks like it's just out of the carpentry shop. Whichever trend it is, it's still a trend and will still therefore pass and will be saturated by more goods, more products, and none of those will really stay on. None of those will really solve an issue. None of those are making questions. None of those are attempting to answer questions. So the I today, and what I'm inviting everyone from an ecological or a personal perspective, is to I question, I investigate, I find. Maybe it's not about designing new things or imposing my new personal aesthetical style on a new product, but instead maybe it's about discovering, finding the designs that were already there, that maybe we just simply hadn't seen them before, finding the possibilities that already existed, that we just haven't tapped on yet. So I love that there's a series of articles about childhood design and youth design, and they tend to have in common a general curiosity to search, look, and question. When I was a kid, I was obsessed with questioning and asking adults how everything worked and why things were in a certain way. So I'm like 3 years old here drawing. My father was an art teacher, and I would love to constantly be drawing, but not drawing my own style of things, instead trying to draw ideas, trying to draw parallel versions of everything I was seeing around me. So for example, I grew up in South America. Soccer in South America is hugely important, but not all kids have soccer shoes, because some of them just had their shoes for Sundays that their mothers would polish, and it was the same shoes they would get battered up when playing soccer, got told off and slapped around by their mothers later. At the same time, I would notice that in all these dirt fields you would find all the carcasses of previous soccer balls that were lying about there. So for me as a kid, the natural question, and maybe the natural observation, was what if we recycle these and make shoes that are actually from a leather that's so tough that it can hit the ball back and resist the natural game. So we have that version. In the same way, if I looked around at my toys, my objects that were very dear to me, I would think how those toys could somehow accompany me when I would be an adult, and maybe create certain products that can incorporate a ludical, fun element. Eating and drinking, which are so important for us as kids, how to make the act of sharing a cup of tea something that could actually be visible, that could make us feel special. Here we both get to each take half of the saucer, half of the teacup, and we have a single saucer uniting two people in that simple act of having a cup of tea. If we could look at that again, how about the sushi sticks? Those it was so hard to learn how to use when you were a kid. What if we didn't split them, and instead we had 3 little slots, and our sushi stick could also be some sort of a fork? So you have Western and Oriental cultures together, both being able to use the same product with the same simplicity. The zippers that you would struggle with so much, get caught on occasionally. Why not, instead of using the zipper as always to bond 2 pieces of cloth, why can't we use the zipper per se as our cloth and just repeat it constantly over and over again until we create our own personal cloth that can be opened, closed, stripped down one way or another. So this dress, you can use it as a top, as a bikini, as a mini skirt, as a long dress, and so on. Continuing to play with materials, a little bit older, I was given a ton of plywood. And I could have built my own little clubhouse with the plywood, but instead it occurred to me that I would never have this amount of plywood again. So why not create giant blocks of it? Talk with the gardener who knew how to use a power saw and start carving out shapes. So we could use the stacks almost as if it was a personal block of marble. And if we could use the wood in that way, why not find ways in which we could personalize our own furniture pieces so that they could adapt, almost like a secondary wall that would change and adapt depending on the different products that we would be using and presenting. This is the piano shelf then, and each one of those sticks goes up or down depending on what you want to place. And if I could have this system on a single wall, how could I take that to a 3-dimensional element that maybe could use the same system to allow us to have a surface that would cover a volume? So we have a cabinet that, for the first time maybe, or maybe one of the first experiments, where instead of having the typical box that the industry has told us we have to do to save money, we would have a surface, a general surface for the whole cabinet that would open up or close from wherever we wanted. So, copying the idea of a porcupine, this piece could completely open up or completely close, or just allow you to simply search inside it. And if keels were suddenly being interesting to people, how could we get those keels and multiply them to the maximum? What sort of keel could you buy that was very cheap, that was relatively ecological, that could become a surface in itself? I came up with bamboo sticks, the same skewers that you would use for a barbecue, and purchased 80,000 of them. So with 80,000, we got our own cabinet, which could open up or close in any possible way. And in somehow the shape could give the idea of protection of my belongings, and start incorporating certain symbolisms and certain personal elements into a piece that was up to now merely functional. And if I could do that with man-made, man-recycled elements, why not use the elements that are already pre-existing out there? This piece, Umberto Campana, we were having dinner, and he admitted to me that this was one of those pieces he was jealous of not having designed, which was a huge honor for me. It's a simple tree that was toppled over, laser cut on the top, and we threw a piece of glass on top. Now the interesting thing is, in this race to design, to draw the next shape, we'll never beat nature. We'll never do something that will be personally better than something we might be able to find already that has an intrinsic beauty that's incredible. So for me to be able to say, hey, I won't design, I step back, we're simply going to top this over and celebrate its personal design, this is an option that would be incredibly satisfying. If nature could be used in such a way, why would taxidermy be out of bounds? In this case, I found a dead goose. It was outside a taxidermy museum with its neck broken. And I arrived home to my mother and I tell her, Mom, I'm doing a lamp with a dead duck. I felt, as the moment the words were coming out of my mouth, as some sort of a psychopath, and I was like, fuck, this is wrong. What I'm doing is wrong. Nevertheless, at the same time, there's a gut feeling that there's a certain logic in this piece that I appreciate, and I hope people would appreciate. There's something about the combination of humor, of practicality, of a morbid charm, a gruesome ingenuity that somehow connects us to things that we never thought we might connect ourselves to. And if we could do taxidermy, why not use live animals too? This particular piece is representing the cage in which every one of, I don't know the amount of millions of chickens are killed and slaughtered, grown and so on. And if you could have therefore a functional piece that could create awareness over a subject, over the average chicken that we're used to seeing completely bare naked with cellophane in the supermarket aisle, you somehow started incorporating more political elements into the same design. Within these political approaches to elements, what else could you do? I started growing, I started getting a little bit edgier and wanting to ask more and more questions. So when asked to design my own chopping board, why not go back to the autopsy board? Why not talk about our own mortality where we all get cut down? The problem with dealing with a lot of these subjects is that we have a general strong reaction to them. So you also need to figure out ways to make them slightly funny. So this one was called the wife chopping board, to somehow talk about this idea that she would be getting back to their husband. We then had to do the better half chopping board. Now, I live in New York, and coming from South America, I was quite naive. Most of my friends in New York do coke. I've never done it, not my thing, but I was astonished by seeing people do little lines of cocaine and then start snorting them, and it would seem so painstakingly laborious that while I was drinking my whiskey, I started sketching and designing how could you possibly consume cocaine in a better way. So it occurred to me that if I had a little slab with 4 indentations, my friends could simply swipe the cocaine on top, the 4 lines would be immediately made, and then it's ready to use. Now, because I was quite naive, the lines here are too fat. So when I arrived with a present to my friend and said, "Hey Sebastian, it's super sweet of you, super nice, but if I had one of those lines, I'd be over the moon right now." So it's been perfected since then. Now, if we could touch drugs and elements that are out of our comfort zone, that are way political, what about incorporating into practical elements our fear of terrorism? The idea that by simply adding, instead of 1 wick, 3, 4, 5, we could immediately recreate what we're so scared of into a practical souvenir. This next piece is a piece done in complaints against the Gulf spill. So if we remember, in the 80s, there was a whole campaign against the use of fur, and it became very typical for activists to arrive towards a woman in a big fur coat or a fashion show, grab a bottle of oil and throw it at them. Here, the same way, is now a little device that allows you to do that. So if we basically have a can of WD-40 oil, average oil, spray painted gold so it looks kind of nice, and then it has an industrial rubber band and a pin. Now, by pulling the safety pin, it immediately starts shooting out oil, and it allows you to pull, throw inside an office, a car, whatever. The interesting thing is, beyond the fact of actually using or not using these products, the idea of opening up the possibilities of the functions in which we can design creates a certain awareness that broadens our imagination. This particular piece is a fly swatter that has been rejected by 5 companies so far. 5 companies that came up to me and said, "Sebastian, can you please design us some household goods?" Amongst those in the list was a fly swatter. My fly swatter simply said, "Die." But the companies, all of them were, "Sebastian, we can't say that, it's too harsh." And I'm like, really? I mean, you're selling a device whose sole purpose it is to kill a fly, but we're going to be that cynical that we can't ask the person who's purchasing it to admit and consciously understand what they're doing. It wasn't me. This other piece talks about the fear of suicide, and it can be used to create awareness over that subject. Recently, I started doing products that were a little bit more related to the stuff we were all going through. So the 99% versus the 1%, and how do we talk about this idea of everyone being currently drowning in debt? How do we take that into a household object that could somehow illustrate a political element that we're all fighting for? So I had 2 salt and peppers made, and each one has your average worker inside, which will be filled up by his debts, only to be released little by little to be filled up again. Talking about this continuous cycle that we can't escape from. I got asked by an institution called Skatistan. Skatistan is an institution, US-based, that's teaching kids in Afghanistan to skateboard. Now, at first I said, "Hey, I don't want to participate of that. It sounds like you want to teach kids in Afghanistan to make burgers. Not really my thing. Sounds like a very imperialistic point of view." The interesting thing about Skatistan is that by teaching kids to skate, they were corralling in a lot of young girls that would never have had access to an education. Girls in Afghanistan, especially in certain areas, are not allowed to learn how to read. And by coming into the skateboarding school, they would be secretly taught how to read. So we created some skateboards with a friend to raise money and awareness for this piece. This one, the sandpaper that would hold you on the skateboard is laser cut to leave the figure. At the same time, when you use it, you're stepping on the face of the woman in a very similar face, in a similar way that unfortunately the culture in Afghanistan is constantly stepping on women. If I could do that with other religions, why not the religion I was raised in? So we created Christian popsicles. Now, these Christian popsicles were wine popsicles, okay? So you have the typical stick, why not add a horizontal, why not laser burn inside my Jesus figure? To make it complete, we need to make a wine popsicle that works. I had no idea that wine is very hard to freeze, so I had to boil wine. My wife completely pissed off because of all the fumes in the apartment. And when I had all the wine ready, the idea was you made all the popsicles and went to church with them. So I arrive at church with my cooler, with all my popsicles inside. I get as close as possible to the priest. And at the precise moment when he says, I turn this wine into the blood of Christ, I'm like, okay, my popsicles are done. So in New York at an opening for the design festival in New York, we were giving out Jesus popsicles. And the interesting thing is that beyond the disrespect that people might feel, beyond the provocation, this kind of project ended up turning up on CNN, on a series of blogs, and you would have 1,500 people commenting and suddenly discussing about how the miracle work of the priest actually functioned. Had I actually placed my cooler underneath the altar before the Mass started? Because then it probably would work. Did the priest have it 3 meters away? Because then maybe his powers had a certain distance that they could achieve. And just by the fact of asking people to question again what they believe in was for me extremely satisfying. In the US there's a whole issue with gun control. The NRA is a big lobbying group constantly pushing the idea that everyone should be able to go into a supermarket and buy an AK-47. Somehow that should be alright. And why not talk then about guns everywhere, at home, within our furniture, within our natural pieces, and how those are participating of us. I have a final furniture piece in here. It's an Occupy Wall Street protest sign. This piece was originally designed for the 99% of Occupy protesters that would go with their tents, pitch up in a certain space, and have their signs and protest. These same guys would end the day going back to their tent with no furniture, no nothing. I figured out why not design something that they can use. A foldable chair, they have the sign, and then they go, sit down, play cards with their friends or whatever. The interesting thing was, it occurred to me then that maybe I could sell these to the 1%. If I made that chair glossy and beautiful enough, we could have some sort of Troy horse that would enter the homes of the 1% with the message of the 99 and then force them to have to give explanations to the other wealthy friends about why they have this particular piece. So each one of these was a different sign, and every single one of the signs was scanned. These were all signs that were actually used in the protest. The interesting thing of this project is that I also told the press that I would not disclose if I was going to keep 99% of the money or 1% of the money. If I was going to donate 99% of the proceeds to the Occupy movement, or I was going to go for the fame or the greediness of the 1%. And by placing yourself right in the middle of that spot, you open up the debate for everyone to give their own opinions. Continuing with the design art movement and the design for the wealthy, I'm very lucky to be able to sell my stuff next to Zaha Hadid and Mark Newson and all the big names with all the big products and prices and privileges that come with that. But I think it's extremely important to always remember that you need to continue to bite the hand that feeds you. This particular piece is a fireplace carved out in Carrara marble by hand. Okay? Now, the piece is carved out to resemble an opera. It has its little stage, the steps that go up, and it comes with a bucket of wooden figures that are carved out. The whole idea is that you dare your collector to open up one of those $2,000 bottles of wine, feel filthy rich, throw a match into it, and unleash the drama right in their home. For another $1,000, I will happily give them another figure that they can burn and so on. Now, within all these variety of objects, once again, what I'm trying to do is to discover the things that are right there, right below our noses, that maybe we hadn't looked at before. I'm trying to invite people to look again, to stop designing just for style and start thinking again. This particular piece I love dearly. It's very simple. No one's really given it much attention, but I love it. We've had binoculars for 100 years or more. But telescopes, we start using them since we designed the binoculars. What I've never understood is why we continue to have one peephole on our door and have to constantly squint to look through it when you could totally have two peepholes. And by having two peepholes, we can be immediately somehow received in the door by a figure that welcomes us, that looks like us. For me, it's incredibly important to invite everyone to look again. There's so much out there that if you open up your other eye, you'll be able to see. We don't need to force on other people our personal designs. We can simply show them things that were right there, point at it and say, hey, how about this other variety? Within this awareness, why not try to create a function that continues to make our clients, continues to make them feel aware of themselves. This particular breakfast table, the only thing it has is a little slanted edge, just like a swimming pool, with a strip of mirror in the back. And that allows the user to be sitting down, and it doesn't matter if they have a computer or they have a bowl of cereal, they're constantly seeing the reflections of their eyes. And it's just their eyes that they're constantly seeing. If I can get to look at your eyes, if we can get other people to look at themselves, why not get other people to be aware of time, how short time we have, and how important it is to do things that are relatively, I don't know, important for all of us. So, watches, there are hundreds, thousands, millions. This is the first watch that doesn't tell you the time, but tells you the watch that time is passing. So this watch here doesn't have a minute stick, it doesn't have an hour stick. It simply has the second stick ticking. It seems extremely simple. It could even be slightly cheesy. But the fact that it's a wind-up watch, and every morning when you get up, you have to put it on, wind it up for the sole purpose of reminding yourself that you want to be aware that day that time is passing and you want to make the most of it, suddenly becomes an incredibly valuable function. And for me, the first time I made this and I was waiting for the next subway and I'm on my own and I hear the tick, 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 I almost got a panic attack, because we look at the watch and we see information. We see the stick in 6, the other stick in 12, and we read information. We don't watch the sticks moving. We don't watch our time moving. If we're going to talk about mortality, let's face mortality and incorporate it within our functional pieces. This piece was made in honor of my grandfather, who had a very similar cabinet. Until his last days, he would go and do all sorts of things. I never knew exactly what he was doing. He was probably just getting his papers and things ready to pass away. So I incorporated a real skull. I had to ask a doctor friend to purchase a skull, because you can't just go into a store and buy a skull. And we had it encased in acrylic and fitted in. Now, if you had the door up, you can simply use the rest of the drawers to throw your socks in or use it for whatever function you want. But if you have the door down, you can remember our time and our mortality. And it's not that I have a fascination with death, but much like Steve Jobs said, from the moment that we're aware of the end, it is so much more easier within that context to free ourselves from all the things that we're afraid of, from all the elements that are stopping us from taking certain decisions and making certain jumps that we could be doing. In that sense, why not address my own mortality, build my own coffin? This is the boat coffin. And the whole purpose of it is that we understand that at the end of our lives, we'll spend at least a week in the hospital, connected to a respirator, an IV drip, and all sorts of things. My wife, my kids, my family won't really be talking to me as they might have tried to do before in other eras. Instead, they'll be talking to the doctor. Doctor, how long has he got to live? Are we going to be able to stabilize him or do this or that? Now, what if instead I decided, you know what, last 2 weeks, I don't want them. I would rather, I'm sent in my wheelchair to the beach, have all my friends gathered up on shore, I'll toast with them, say goodbye, thank you for everything, go into the sea, pull the plug, throw some pills in, at least die in style. You're going to die once, you might as well go down in a good way. Continuing with that search, this is some sort of coffin, mortuary coffee table. Now, up to now I've been talking about products, and I'm going to take 5 more minutes just to talk about the importance of being aware in our everyday surroundings. It's not just within our houses, the products that surround us, but it's all around everywhere else. You've all seen the memorial benches, right? In New York, to have a memorial bench like John Lennon, it costs somewhere between $15,000 and $20,000 to have your own memorial bench in Central Park. Now, I wanted to have my own bench, but I didn't want to spend the money, so I went to Chinatown, had 50 signs made, and started screwing them around on different benches. Each bench says, in loving memory of blah blah blah, who continues to live for the time being. Sitting on that personal bench is scary, but it's also incredibly functional and incredibly useful. Continuing to talk within the economics that we were talking before. The idea of how today corporations are considered people in America, or how the super PACs are deciding the next president. Why not talk about how the money is claiming our cities, is claiming our democracy, and turn normal lines into money lines? Turn an average bridge bypass into a religious experience. Or maybe try to create awareness over even more important themes. I travel a lot. At the beginning I would always take very cheap flights, and those cheap flights would always go through Atlanta. And in Atlanta I have all the US soldiers coming back in. It's very, very strong to see 18-year-olds in full combat gear coming back with the eyes of someone who's been serving abroad in war. And it occurred to me that my brother, who's kind of that age, my small brother, being in war would be incredibly devastating for him. And the numbers of the suicide rates behind all these kids must be huge. I started searching over the web and couldn't really find anything. Okay, there was little bits and pieces of information in different parts, but there wasn't an information one could easily access. So suddenly I started summing up the suicide statistics by Marines, by aviation, and so on. And what I found out was that in 2009, US soldiers had committed suicide 2 times more than had been killed by enemy fire. We were killing ourselves 2 times more than they were killing us. Now, as a designer, we have the capability of illustrating things that most people don't have. And whether this is art or design or the graphic information design, this particular piece outside my studio, where I drew an eerie line for each one of the soldiers that had died, immediately started grabbing attention. It started getting photographed, and it spread like wildfire over the internet. It ended up on CNN, and many articles came after this. And so in a small way, it proves that we can make differences in policies and elements, as long as we're capable of illustrating statistics and numbers and problematics that would be very difficult otherwise. Now I have 2 more projects I want to show you, and with this I'll be done. In Chile, you all heard about the 33 miners trapped underground, right? The news was everywhere, but the president of Chile at the time had told everyone that it would take 4 months to rescue these guys and take them out. Now, I was extremely afraid that news in today's era would die out. and that people would stop being interested in these 33 guys trapped below, and the government would slowly start pulling resources from this particular project. So it occurred to me that it was then necessary to have some sort of a signal in the city so that the average Chilean, when they're driving back home, going to their wives and kids, would pass by and be remembered that these 33 guys were still trapped below. So I found this building that was 33 stories high, and we put up a cross of 33 lights and a horizontal. What this cross of light did is, in a way, it captured a general element in the religious Christian culture of South America, where we all light up a candle for our loved ones, wishing them well. But at the same time, it was also talking about the guys who were down below, buried underneath. This particular building could be seen from all over the city. And for a certain amount of days, everyone could be driving, and it didn't matter where you were. If you looked at Santiago's horizon, you would see the cross, and you would be remembered that these guys were trapped below. And finally, I'm going to show a final piece about Santiago. You've all heard of General Pinochet, much like Castro or other dictators of their time. In 1973, he decides to topple over a democratically elected president. With the help of the CIA, they go into power and they bombard Chile's national palace, the equivalent of 10 Downing Street or the White House. Our national palace went up in flames in a similar way that we saw 9/11 go up in flames, or the tube stations here go up in flames. Now, all of the political prisoners there afterwards were all placed in our national stadium. Many were shot, many were tortured. What I've done with the money I get from the furniture, from the products I make, was rent that stadium for a whole week for me. We brought in heavy machinery, dug up a hole in the center of the soccer field, and planted a tree right in the center. It's a 10-meter magnolia tree. Covered up the grass and laid it out as if the tree had always been there, as if it had sprung from that earth. The stadium was open to the public, and then anyone could walk in. You, me, go get a picnic underneath that tree. Stadiums are incredibly impressive when you walk inside. If you're lucky to go into the field, because of the high walls, it doesn't matter if it's in downtown Santiago, there's no sound. And to walk into that now memorial park, and be surrounded by these walls, by this history, by those roots in that earth, with that blood, but yet with that tree and that life and those leaves, was somehow extremely powerful and extremely functionally healing for an artistic piece that was designed to fulfill a function. Now, to celebrate the end and to somehow have a lighter finish, we had an all-star soccer match played with Chile's all-star soccer players that all went down. It came Real Madrid and so on, the different teams they were all playing for. This is one of my favorite moments in life. We had all the soccer players in line, everyone handed their heart, and we played the national anthem. 30,000 people went to see the match, and people would roar whenever the ball would fall on top of the tree. We even had to put a guy on top of the tree just to throw the ball down. They would celebrate so much more when they would joggle around the tree than when they would make a goal, the normal goalies. Now, this is a project I'm about to do, and with this I'm finished. Times Square is one of the most populated and contaminated visual areas in the world. Just the amount of electricity that goes in there is crazy. The amount of inputs and information that we're receiving are somewhat a very interesting phenomenon of what we see on a normal basis on the web. And this next project is going to be extremely simple. All I want to do is have a video loop yawning amidst all the craziness. Now, as we all know, yawns are contagious. If I yawn now, bet one of you is going to start yawning at some point. Or you might resist it, but it works. Now imagine all the tourists down there, contaminated by all this stuff, to suddenly start yawning at these things, yawning at the information, at the products, at the markets, at the things that are being offered. And because they are contagious, hopefully all those tourists will then continue their way around, spreading an epidemic of yawn to all the products and contaminations of things that we don't need, that we shouldn't be making. So again, for all of us that are designing, it's not about imposing on others our personal aesthetics and new styles. Maybe it's about looking again and finding those things that were there, those things that will be instant classics, those things that will remind us that there's another way of looking at life. Thank you so much. I'm Sebastian Errazuriz. I hope you like the stuff.